Typically, on this channel I stay within the confines of the Second World War, but in this video we're going to venture a little further back in time. When the Spanish-American War erupted in April of 1898, the United States needed every warship it could muster to square off with a powerful Spanish squadron that had been dispatched to Cuban waters. Unfortunately, one of its most modern and powerful battleships was located over 14,000 nautical miles away in the Pacific Northwest. What followed was a 66-day race that would turn USS Oregon into a national hero. Oregon was the third and final member of the Indiana class of pre-dreadnought battleships that were built during the early 1890s. Recognized as the first modern U.S. battleships, Oregon and her sisters Indiana and Massachusetts were built as part of a modernization program that was aimed at strengthening the American fleet for a possible conflict with a European power. Overall, Oregon was 351 feet long, 69 feet wide, and displaced a little over 10,000 tons. She was powered by 2 triple expansion steam engines and 4 coal-fired boilers, which generated a top speed of 15 knots. Her main battery consisted of 4 13-inch 35 caliber guns that were housed in 2 twin turrets. These were capable of firing an 1,100-pound projectile up to 12,000 yards. Her secondary battery consisted of 8 8-inch 35 caliber guns, which were housed in 4 twin turrets. These were supported by a battery of 6 6-inch 40 caliber guns that were located in casemate batteries amidships. For close-in defense against torpedo boats, she carried a variety of 6- and 1-pounder guns that were located in individual mounts throughout her superstructure. And, as was standard for capital ships of the period, Oregon carried several 18-inch torpedo tubes and above-water mounts. Congress authorized the construction of 3 Indiana-class battleships in June of 1890, and in that authorization, it was specified that one of the ships had to be built on the West Coast. Therefore, after the first 2 vessels were awarded to William Cramp and Sons of Philadelphia, the contract for the third was given to Union Iron Works in San Francisco. Oregon's keel was subsequently laid down there on November 19, 1891, and she was launched almost 2 years later on October 26, 1893. After fitting out, she was commissioned into the United States Navy on July 15, 1896. She then completed her sea trials as part of the Pacific Squadron, with whom she served for about the next year or so. In March of 1898, Oregon was ordered to steam to the East Coast to reinforce the North Atlantic Squadron as tensions with Spain grew over the sinking of USS Maine in Havana Harbor. Racing along at a speed of 12 knots, she arrived in Jupiter, Florida 66 days later after having logged over 14,000 nautical miles. For the U.S. Navy, this was the first transfer of a capital ship from one coast to the other in a time of war, and it proved to be quite positive for the Navy's public image. Oregon joined the North Atlantic Squadron at Key West on May 26th. By that time, the flying squadron had scouted ahead and located the Spanish fleet inside the harbor at Santiago de Cuba. The North Atlantic Squadron arrived off that port on June 1st, and over the next month maintained a blockade of it. At 8:45 on the morning of July 3rd, the Spanish finally attempted to sortie from the harbor. After they cleared the harbor at 9:35, lookouts aboard the armored cruiser Brooklyn spotted them approaching and fired their guns to warn the other American ships. As the Spanish ships headed west, the armored cruiser Infanta Maria Teresa charged Brooklyn in a delaying tactic to give the other ships in the squadron time to escape. Since she was the only American capital ship with enough steam built up when the battle began, Oregon took the lead in the ensuing chase. Gunfire from Oregon and Brooklyn quickly set Infanta Maria Teresa on fire, and, fearing a magazine explosion, she was ordered to be run aground at 10:25. Another Spanish armored cruiser, the Almirante Oquendo, suffered a similar fate 5 minutes later. The armored cruiser Vizcaya was also forced ashore shortly thereafter and struck her colors to surrender at 10:36. The 2 Spanish destroyers with the group were also pummeled by the American battleships. USS Indiana nearly cut one in half with a 13-inch shell, which forced her to run aground where she exploded. The other one was slaughtered by the secondary batteries of Oregon, Iowa, and Indiana, which led to her crew surrendering to the gunboat Gloucester. The armored cruiser Cristobal Colon was the only Spanish warship still running westward at this point. Oregon, Texas, and Brooklyn all gave chase and slowly caught up to the fleeing Spanish cruiser. Realizing the hopeless position he was in, at 1:20, her CO turned towards the coastline and struck his flag as his men began scuttling the vessel. Oregon suffered no damage in the action, owing in large part to the poor Spanish shooting. American successes in Cuba and in the Philippines caused Spain to beg for peace in August, and the war officially ended on December 10th after the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Following the conclusion of the Spanish-American War, Oregon was assigned to the Asiatic Squadron. She reached Manila in March of 1899 and subsequently operated out of there during the first year of the Philippine-American War. Then, in June of 1900, Oregon was ordered to northern China in response to the Boxer Rebellion. While passing through the Bohai Strait on June 28th, she struck an uncharted rock and subsequently got hung up on it. She remained there for a week before being refloated on July 5th. Oregon patrolled the Yangtze River until May of 1901, when she departed for an overhaul at the Puget Sound Navy Yard. She remained there for a year and a half before heading back to the Chinese coast in early 1903. Upon her return to the United States in February of 1906, she was decommissioned and placed in the reserve fleet at Puget Sound. Oregon remained out of service for the next 5 years. She received a fairly minimal modernization during that period, which included the installation of a cage main mast. She also had her slow-firing 6-inch guns removed and replaced by a battery of 12 3-inch guns, which had a superior rate of fire to deal with quick-moving torpedo boats. On August 29, 1911, Oregon was recommissioned, but she remained assigned to the reserve fleet until October. She saw little action over the next 2 years and was ultimately returned to the reserve fleet in September of 1914. She was commissioned again in early 1915 in order to participate in the Panama Pacific International Exposition that was being held in San Francisco. She then spent the next couple of years bouncing back and forth between the reserve fleet and active duty. Although Oregon saw no combat during the First World War, she was used to escort troop ships carrying the expedition that intervened in the Russian Civil War in 1918. In the years after returning from Russia, Oregon returned to her routine of alternating between the reserve fleet and active duty. In September of 1919, she hosted President Woodrow Wilson for a review of the Pacific Fleet in the waters off Seattle. The Washington Naval Treaty, which was signed in early 1922, called for Oregon to be demilitarized, and she was accordingly disarmed the next year. In June of 1925, the Navy decided to loan her to the state of Oregon, and she was subsequently moored in downtown Portland later that year. And there she resided on the Willamette River as a museum ship until the United States entered World War II in December of 1941. In early 1942, the Navy determined that Oregon needed to be scrapped for the war effort, and she was accordingly struck from the Naval Vessel Register on November 2nd of that year. She was sold a month later on December 7th. In March of 1943, the Navy requested that the breaker stop after her superstructure had been cleared and her internal fittings and equipment had been removed. They had determined that Oregon would be useful as an ammo barge during amphibious operations in the Mariana Islands, which were scheduled for mid-1944. She was subsequently turned over to the Navy, then loaded down with munitions and towed to Guam. Oregon remained off Guam through the end of the war and for a little more than a decade afterward. On the night of November 14, 1948, Oregon broke free from her moorings during a typhoon and drifted away. After an extensive search, aircraft located her adrift some 500 nautical miles to the southeast of Guam on December 8th. She was then recovered and towed back to Guam. This picture, which was taken in April of 1952, shows Oregon moored near the Iowa-class battleship Wisconsin, which was visiting Guam for repairs at the time. I feel that it's one of the more fascinating juxtapositions that you will ever see when it comes to naval history. You have the first modern U.S. battleship design moored next to what would be, at least for the time being, the last United States battleship design commission. 351 feet in overall length compared to 887 feet, 10,000 tons, at least when Oregon was commissioned, versus 57,000 tons. Looking at these two pictures, it's quite impressive just how far American battleship design advanced in about a 50-year span, or actually a little over 30 years if you take into account the building moratorium imposed by the naval limitation treaties of the 20s and 30s. Oregon remained off Guam until 1956, when she was sold to the Massey Supply Corporation, which in turn sold her to the Iwai Sango Company of Kawasaki, Japan. She was then towed there and broken up. Several parts of Oregon remain in Portland to this day. Her foremast was saved and erected in 1956 at the Tom McCall Waterfront Park, while her wheel is held in the collection of the Oregon Historical Society. Both of her funnels also survived, but are not currently on public display. Ultimately, despite their success during the Spanish-American War, Oregon and her sisters proved to be disappointments due to their size and low freeboard, which hampered operations greatly and prevented them from being modernized during the early revolutionary days of the dreadnought. Nevertheless, they were the first modern battleships built by the United States Navy, to which all that came after can trace their lineage. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Or, if you already have and you'd like to support the channel even more, please think about becoming a channel member. Early access to videos and members-only shorts are just some of the perks you'll enjoy. Once again, thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.